Hi everyone, just wanted to do a quick update since I was interviewed. So at the time of filming, I was actually pregnant with my third baby. And since then, I had a healthy vegan pregnancy again and gave birth to a little girl. This is Finley. She is 4.5 months old and currently doing really well. She's exclusively breastfed with a plan of moving to baby-led weaning when she's 6 months. And I just wanted to say that both Kira and Shaylee are both doing well on the vegan diet and are thriving and growing every day. And I just want to say a quick hello.
Hello, I'm Kira and I'm 8 years old, and this is my sister Shaylee, and she is 4 years old.
Hi, my name's Sam. I'm a former physician in preventive medicine and epidemiology, but now I'm a stay-at-home mom and homeschooler of two young girls who've been raised vegan since birth. I started being vegan in 2007, so it's been about 17 years now.
And what made you do that?
So when I was in high school at the time, and I had a friend who I danced with who was vegan, so that kind of planted that seed in my head, kind of just opened up my eyes to the whole world of veganism and why it's important. And so slowly over time, I was like vegetarian, started cutting out things. And then the more I immersed myself in more of the animal ethics side of it, I realized that I shouldn't really be eating any of it. So I decided just to cut it all out and realize that it was better for my health as well at the same time. From then, I just loved it. And at the time, it was a little bit challenging because it was still kind of new and the whole vegan movement hadn't really begun at that point, especially for me being in high school. But that was kind of the start of it and haven't looked back.
Wow. So it sounds like a lot of this started for ethical reasons.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both ethical reasons and for the health benefits as well.
Did you see something in particular or watch something or read something in particular that helped you realize the ethical component?
At the time, I remember going back, and since it was 17 years ago, a little fuzzy on the details, but I do remember looking at some of the information PETA had on their website. There was a couple documentaries that I had watched, and I was just completely disturbed by the factory farming process. And as a kid, I had no idea that went on. And so those were the kind of things that pushed me into the direction. And I think once I found out more about the health benefits, it just increased that drive to do so.
And what did you discover about the health benefits?
Just in terms of, like the lower risks of like cancer, and being someone who was going into medicine, I had an interest in health already. And so I read like the China study was one of the first books that I read prior to going to medical school. So I read that sometime during college. So just looking at the benefits in terms of like lower cardiovascular risk for disease, lower risk of cancer, and just being able to stay like healthy and in terms of like the end of my life, just being able to be active and not spend all the time in the hospital, or not being able to move around my house and be independent. And so those were some of the things that kind of drove me.
And I know it's been a while, and you were pretty young. When we're young, we're pretty invincible, right? Do you recall any physiological, mental, or emotional changes after going vegan?
No, not really. I was a runner, and I actually, I did perfectly fine running long distance. I ran a marathon. My goal was before the age of 21, so I ran it before my 21st birthday. So I had no problems training long distance.
This is all after going vegan?
After going vegan, yes. I picked up running after I went vegan, and I never really had any issues with, maintaining strength. I did some weightlifting too throughout college, and never had any issue putting on any muscle or anything like that.
Eventually, you got to the point where you started having children. Was there any difficulties having children?
No, I absolutely no troubles with fertility. I'm very grateful for that, because I know there's a lot of women who do struggle with that. But for both the kids, never had any troubles with getting pregnant or anything like that. Pregnancies were uncomplicated, had no issues at all during pregnancy, aside from the usual, that most women have with like nausea and fatigue, but nothing that required medical intervention.
Do you feel like you had to do anything different as a pregnant vegan? Do you feel like it's different in any way?
I think the only thing is, I think sometimes there's this pressure, because a lot of people think that a vegan diet is not adequate, that there's this extra pressure to make sure you are eating everything you need to eat. But I'm someone who's interested in nutrition anyways, and so I didn't really mind kind of delving into that and making sure that I was getting what I needed. I do think the one thing that sometimes can be challenging when you're pregnant is if you're avoiding a lot of like the junk food, sometimes it can be hard to get enough food, especially when your stomach starts to like shrink and you lose the space for the food. So, I follow a mostly like whole foods diet, but like during pregnancy, sometimes having to like eat things that are maybe a little bit more not my usual, like some desserts and things like that, and just enjoy that. So like just to make sure I was actually getting enough. So that was really the only thing, was just actually make sure I was getting enough food, because I try to eat so healthfully, generally speaking.
So when you say you eat healthy, like you're talking about legumes, greens, grains, fruits, veggies, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, you know, of course, herbs and spices, but it's probably easy to get enough food from those, right?
Yeah, and like I'm a fairly active person, so I think on top of like being very active during pregnancy, it just increases like your caloric needs more. And so just to make sure I was getting more, I had to just be a little bit more conscientious of my choices, whether that meant like adding in more healthy fats, like eating maybe a spoonful of peanut butter or something, just to make sure, because I like to be active, going on a lot of walks or doing strength training, whatever it was that I enjoyed at the time. So just to make sure that I was getting enough, or avocados, just adding a little bit more of the healthy fats in during pregnancy versus other times when I'm not pregnant or not breastfeeding, then that would usually be like the biggest change.
Yeah, cool. Now, when you were breastfeeding, how long did you do that?
So my first daughter, so she's currently 7, she was breastfed until 15 months. And then I actually had to wean her because I was starting my residency training and I was going to be gone for long hours. So it would have been very challenging. So she was weaned at 15 months. And then my daughter, who's a little over 3, is still breastfeeding now.
Okay.
So she's still going.
So you might have done the first longer had it not been for the residency.
Yes. She wasn't really ready. I wasn't either, but I didn't really have a choice because of my job. So
Considering how people don't even make it a year sometimes, that's awesome. Did you have to change your diet at all when you were breastfeeding?
So my first one, no. My first daughter. My second daughter actually had, it's called food protein induced allergic proctocolitis. They don't know what the cause is, but essentially she was having blood in her stools at a young age. The biggest cause is usually dairy. I don't eat dairy, so we knew it wasn't that. You know, I don't eat eggs, so like a lot of the big allergens were already cut out. I did actually have to eliminate a lot of major allergens until we saw an improvement. So that was tough.
Did you ever hone in on what it was?
So we think it was soy.
Okay.
It's based on, that's after dairy, that's the most common. Usually dairy and soy go together. And so with the cross-reactivity at least. And so we assume it was soy, and that's how we've been treating it since then. So I was on an elimination diet for a while, and that was really challenging. But it got to the point where I could add everything back in and she was tolerating it. And now that she's 3, we've been slowly adding soy into her diet and challenging her. And she seems like she's doing okay. So that was really the only big change during breastfeeding. You're super hungry when you're breastfeeding too. So it's just like, again, like making sure that you are like actively eating enough food.
How common is that issue that you had?
You know, I'm not sure the actual like statistics, but I'm realizing now that I did more research into it, it's really common. But a lot of moms are usually complaining about dairy, and a lot of people are like, oh, my baby can't tolerate, dairy in my milk. And so I'm realizing now it's super common. I had no idea about it with my first daughter, but the second one, now that I realized and looked into it, it actually is fairly common.
So it didn't happen at all with the first one?
No.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. Solid foods, introducing solid foods. How'd that go?
Yeah, so we did baby-led weaning with both kids. And it was a fun experience just to see them try foods on their own. And I actually think even it's helped a lot with like their coordination as well, because they were learning how to feed themselves, and they were exploring different foods at a young age. That experience went really well. And I think with all kids, you kind of go through these phases of like pickiness. So, first they're really excited to eat everything. They love broccoli, and, they'll eat pretty much anything you give them. And then you kind of get closer to that 2-year age, and every toddler goes that phase of being a little bit picky. And so you kind of just have to be a little bit more creative in the foods that they'll eat. But both kids did really well with the baby-led weaning. And it was just nice to be able to use like components from our meals and give it to them. It can make it like a lot easier too, because you can feed them the same foods that you're feeding essentially.
Just give me some examples of like what you might have started with.
Yeah, so some of the first foods we did, a lot of avocado, because it's like it's soft, it's a healthy source of fat. Sweet potatoes. They love gnawing on broccoli. I think what else we did. Actually, even gnawing on like mango pits was like one thing that I really liked for teething.
Oh wow.
So oatmeal. But even like toast with like a thin like peanut butter or like almond butter on it. That they're actually usually pretty good about eating that at a young age. Beans were another one too. Once they get able to actually like pick them up around 9 months. Beans were a hit with both my kids. They love beans and would just eat them plain. My oldest also liked tofu a lot, since the youngest we couldn't, but my older one, we could give tofu and she would just eat it straight out of the package, so.
It's said that a well-planned vegan diet is healthy and appropriate for every stage of life. And even protective against many chronic diseases. In that sense, it seems like, therefore, then it would be the most ideal way to raise children. Do you feel like you couldn't do it any other way?
Yeah, I feel like especially now that my eyes have been opened to like how healthy a vegan diet is, especially compared to a standard American diet, like, and I see what other kids are eating, and I'm just, yeah, there's no way I could go back to that mindset. And it is sometimes hard because everyone around you pretty much is feeding their kids still very much the standard American diet. And I think because I've been vegan for so long, I don't care anymore what people think about me. And so I think it's the same thing for my kids. Like, I don't care if they think that, you know, I'm depriving my kid because I give them a vegan cupcake instead of a regular cupcake. Yeah. Like, I try to make my kids' experiences like, you know, as normal as possible within reason. So like, I don't want them to feel like they can't partake in a birthday party or, you know,
Halloween.
Right. So we come up with alternatives. So they still have, you know, fun in these childhood experiences, but just in a way that we feel more comfortable with in terms of, you know, ethics, and then also just even the health standpoint. I don't want them to ever think that, like, you know, aside from being vegan, that certain foods are completely off the table. So, you know, I want them to still think they can have like those, like, you know, fun foods and, like, you know, have ice cream if they, you know, vegan ice cream if they want. And so we still include those things, but, you know, on the day-to-day, I try to make sure that their diet is really as balanced as possible. At least that's how I serve it. You know, whether or not they eat it, that's up to them. Yes, I think after learning all this information and knowing, being reassured too that it's healthy for children, and then also seeing my kids grow and develop. I mean, both of my kids have been verbal at such a young age, and, you know, they accelerate really fast. And my older daughter is doing really well in homeschooling and is, you know, 1 to 2 grades above where she should be for her age. And so growing wise, they've always been right on target, no major health issues, you know, except for the little one who was born, you know, with the soy intolerance. But other than that, no major health issues, and they've been thriving. So I don't see any reason to ever go back, at least as my choice. When they're an adult, they make their own decisions. But, you know, in terms when they're in our household, I don't see going to do anything differently than I currently am.
As far as like ethics, do you kind of introduce the ethics to them in any sort of way, like maybe talk to them or show them things, read books in particular to help them understand that?
Yeah, so we have a couple books that talks about like veganism in a young age. I try to avoid like anything that's too like graphic for their age. My oldest is kind of a little bit, I've talked a little bit more about like factory farming to her, and have not really showed her necessarily like any of like the documentaries or anything like that, just because I think it might be a little bit too disturbing at her age. But we read books, we talk about it, we talk about, you know, if we go to visit like a farm, we talk about like why we don't eat the animals, and like, you know, that they deserve to live just like we do, and we shouldn't be taking away, you know, the milk for their babies. And especially with my daughter who's still breastfeeding, she talks about, you know, how she gets her milky, and I'm like, well, why would we take the cow's milk from, you know, the cow when it's there for the baby? And so like we talk about it kind of just in a kid-friendly manner.
And then do you think there's going to be a certain age where you'll try to foster their independence by allowing them to make their own choices, and how might you go about that?
Yeah, and so my husband and I talk about this a lot, just that struggle of like, when do they get to that age where we feel like they have the ability to actually make those decisions for themselves. And we're not sure when that age will be, but it is something that I know we'll have to cross eventually. And I know that personally, I think that will be a little hard for me, just because this is how I see this lifestyle as being a really great thing. But I also have to, you know, respect them as an individual. But yes, it will eventually get to the point where, you know, we will educate them as best as we can and model the behavior that we think they should be following in the lifestyle. But eventually it will be the choice where they would have to make those decisions on them by themselves. And I hope that in the time that I've put into, you know, making sure that they know why we chose this lifestyle, that they will still feel the need to continue with that.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'll feel encouraged to hear that I know a lot of lifelong vegans that are my age even, and have maintained it. Even if they veered off for a second, they always came back to it. There are a few anomalies, but for the most part, the mothers I've interviewed that were like you, thinking like you, that were, you know, introducing the ethics to them at a young age and exposing them to, you know, like the animals and talking to them about it. Yeah, it sounds like you've taken them to sanctuaries before.
We've taken them, to the barn. We took them to the barn sanctuary. We did a tour there, and they really liked it.
And what about like family and friends? How do you deal like with going to visit them? Do you bring your own food? Do you talk to them in advance and anticipate in that way?
Yeah, so I always come prepared. I'm always just a prepared person in general. So I never expect anyone to have food for us. I just go in with that mindset because I don't want us to come and then not realize we have anything or people feel bad. And so I always either talk to whoever it is beforehand and say like, hey, just want to know what you're making. And then that way I can prepare something in advance or, bring a dish to share. I try to make sure that there's usually something like equivalent. So if like there's gonna be a dessert made, I'll make sure we bring a dessert too so that they have something to enjoy. Nobody in my family or my husband's family are vegan, but over the years they've become quite accommodating. So like my mom will cook vegan meals for us. She lives right nearby, so she'll cook dinner for us a couple times a week sometimes and we'll drop it off. And so it's been a good influence on them because now they're eating more vegan meals throughout the week. And my mom says she actually doesn't even really cook meat in the house anymore. So most of the time she cooks either vegan or vegetarian in the house, which is a good improvement. But so yeah, in terms of like getting together with people, there's always just that communication side that needs to occur. And so either talking to someone or just always bringing our food with us.
Nice, nice. And so what does an ideal day of eating look like now?
For me or for the kids?
For everyone. I guess it's the same, right?
Well, we usually eat pretty different except for dinner.
Okay. Well, yeah, for both then.
Yeah, so I mean, I love starting my days with smoothie bowls. It's like been my go-to breakfast for years. And
What do those look like?
So I usually add like some greens or like in greens powder, some like non-dairy milk, usually like almond milk. I do use like a protein powder in there as well. And then just different fruits like berries and like mango. And then I make my own granola, homemade. And so I add like a granola on top and like even just a little bit of like, it's not Cheerios, but like an oat type cereal on top, so just to kind of make it more filling. And that usually keeps me full until lunchtime. And I eat breakfast pretty early too, so we're early birds in our house. And then my kids, their breakfast varies. Today was baked oatmeal, so I make baked oatmeal a lot. I do mostly oat-based breakfast, so I'll make waffles with like their oat-based or pancakes. They love like the blended baked oats, which I think was like a TikTok phase or like trend for a while, so we make those. They call it breakfast cake and they love it. Every once in a while we'll do cereal if there's nothing made and just don't have time in the morning, but generally speaking that's what they would eat. The kids usually eat morning snack and like an afternoon snack, which varies, but you always usually have some sort of fruit with it and then something else to go with it, like dried chickpeas or like some crackers. I told them maybe today I was gonna make them like apple nachos, which we chop like apples with nut butter and like different toppings that they want. Or some bars, we do like the Scout bars or other just like more like date-based bars. So we'll do those for snacks. And then lunchtime, typically I eat some sort of like big salad that has like sweet potato and like avocado for like the healthy fats, and then any sort of beans I have on hand. That's usually my like go-to. I love salads in the middle of the day. And the kids often eat like something different every day. Sometimes it's leftovers from dinner. It could be, they love refried bean tacos. So those are really easy to make in the middle of the day. So they'll eat those, or even pasta. We do a lot of the like chickpea or like lentil based pastas. I started that when they were little just to get the extra protein and iron when they're not eating as much. And so we just stick mostly with the chickpea and lentil pastas. And so they do those for lunch a lot. They love pasta, like avocado toast with some like beans and some veggies on the side. It's kind of a typical like lunch for them. So usually something pretty quick, or like I said, leftovers from dinner. And then dinner is like highly variable. That's kind of like the wild card of the day. I feel like that's usually where I add variety in. They're kids, so sometimes they don't always want to eat what is served, but like the things that they love, like they love tofu. I can make like a baked tofu, pasta with like marinara, veggie burgers. We'll make like chickpea salad sandwiches, tacos are always a hit too. So usually there's some variety during dinner, and then like I said, they would usually have like those 2 snacks a day.
So you basically cover those categories I mentioned earlier: the legumes, the greens, the grains, the fruits, the veggies, and the mushrooms. Do they like mushrooms?
One of them does.
And nuts and seeds are probably important too.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. And then now, as far as like friends, I know they're homeschooled. Do they get to be around non-vegan kids their age, and how does that work? How does that go?
Yeah, so I mean, we have kids in our neighborhood who they're around none of them are vegan. We have a homeschool group we're really active with. One of the girls is actually vegan, which has been a really nice opportunity for us to just have that connection, both being homeschooled and vegan. So that their connection with their family has been really nice in the last year. But most of the kids are otherwise not vegan as well. And I don't think it really bothers. I mean, my youngest is too young to really pick up on things yet, but for my 7-year-old, she It doesn't seem to bother her. I mean, she went to school for like half a year and she was in daycare prior to that. So she's used to being around kids like eating food that's not what she eats. You know, sometimes she tells me she looks at what someone else is eating, gets a little grossed out because she knows what it is. She's kind of used to it and says that it doesn't really bother her. Like I said before, I always try to make sure that she's not missing out on like her childhood experiences. I don't want her to feel deprived by what she's eating. And so I'm always checking in on her to make sure that she feels like she's, you know, has felt included and everything like that.
Hey, what's your name?
Kira.
And how old are you?
I'm 7.
And how long you been vegan?
7 years, which is my whole life.
And do you like being vegan?
Yeah.
Do you think you could ever be any other way?
No, not really.
Do you kind of want others to maybe think about doing this and think it's important for them to consider?
Yeah, a little. Yeah.
Okay. Why is that?
Because lots of the friends I play with usually, like at lunchtime when I'm at school, sometimes I just look at people's food and I'm like some of my friends, most of my friends are vegan, and I just look at their food and get grossed out about it sometimes.
And do you like animals a lot?
Yeah.
And not want them to hurt?
I did not want them hurt.
What are some of your favorite animals?
I like horses and dogs.
And you've been to a sanctuary before?
Yes.
What was that like?
It was fun. My sister was there and we got a book about animals, about the farm, and my sister really likes that book.
What are some of your favorite foods to eat?
Tofu and these lentil patties that my granny makes.
And do you ever help your mom in the kitchen?
Yeah, I sometimes help her make granola.
And what do you want to be when you grow up?
Probably a vet.
I've heard that's a really tough program to go through.
I'm sure she'll change her mind too. 10 times before, at least.
How are you doing in school? Are you doing good with your program here?
Yes, I do a math program called Beast Academy.
Beast Academy? Oh, wow. And what are your grades like?
For math, I'm usually in like second grade or the end of first.
Okay.
Oh, she's talking about grade level. I don't grade her
Yeah.
schoolwork, so she doesn't really
Yeah.
know in terms of how well she's doing, but she's doing really well.
Do you feel like you're strong?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're healthy? And are you happy being vegan?
Yeah, I like being vegan.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you getting in front of the camera. Any last minute encouraging words or anything we didn't talk about that either one of you would like to get out there?
Do you have anything to say? No? I think the thing is, like, don't be afraid to, like, find support from other people. Like, there is a community out there, and I think sometimes it can feel, like, really isolating at times, like, when you first go vegan, depending on, like, what area you live in. But I think just, like, to take that step to try to connect to people, like, don't be afraid to, like, connect to groups online. Like, that's actually been a great resource for me. And I know I was a little bit hesitant at first to kind of reach virtually, but that actually can be a really good source for people who live in an area that's not super vegan friendly. But I think that sense of community is really helpful in the beginning. And even like now, like 17 years in, like I feel like I'm slowly finding a more connection to like the vegan community, which I've been longing for for a long time. And I feel like it fills me with so much happiness being able to connect to other people. So for those who are like just starting out, like make sure to connect to like as easily as possible like to other people. And if you can find like other vegan families, whether you in person or online, can just be a great resource just for, you know, just to feel that connection, have the kids feel like they have someone else that they can connect to as well. I think that can be really great.
Yeah, somebody had that suggestion one time, like when you first go vegan, find a vegan that you can make friends with. Somebody else was hoping that my website, raisingchildrenvegan.com, might be a tool to help people find vegans in their community. So I'm hoping to make it like that. Do you know of any resources like specifically that somebody could go to for, is it like Meetup, or is there something like Facebook groups?
So I'm active in like the Vegan Detroit group. And so that's where I have found actually some of our friends now that are vegan, we're through that group. So that's been just really the only way that I have.
Well, I appreciate your time and thanks so much for doing this. If you will, I want to grab my phone and get a picture kind of this scene here. Okay. Thank you for being so courageous and getting in front of the camera.
You're welcome.
She was excited.
That's cool.